Good evening, everyone. Golden Detective History coming to you from my car for another edition of Haunted Discussions. This evening, I want to focus on the topic of my first encounters with the paranormal, the supernatural, ghosts. And it's actually a two-folded question / discussion topic, whereas the first fold to the discussion is my first exposures to the phenomenon of the supernatural. And the second being my first experience interacting with a truly supernatural entity, an event. The first topic would be my first exposures to the topic, and that would probably happen about the age of 6 or 7, maybe 8. I think it was about 6 or 7 with my first exposures, and it was actually a television exposures. Whereas back in the day, a lot of the cable channels used to actually show a lot of really good content. Specifically, the History Channel used to show history. It used to be historical things, documentaries, shows, stories, movies, not just Duck Dynasty, Swamp People, UFO conspiracy theories, but it was a lot of historical stuff. And my first exposures to the supernatural was the show Haunted History. Haunted History was a show that highlighted various different cities amongst the United States, and then eventually went abroad overseas to other places. And in this show, they highlighted various different believed to be haunted places. And that was some of my first exposures to the supernatural. Episodes like one focused on New Orleans, Louisiana, and the outskirts around it. When I heard about the voodoo princess Marie Laveau, with the St. Louis Cemetery and the French Quarters, where I learned about Chloe and the Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana. It's where I heard about the Shining Hotel in Essex Park, Colorado, Stanley Hotel. It was my exposure to a lot of those things. Edgar Allan Poe's grave and his story of the macabre, his actual story of the macabre, not just the ones that he wrote about in his books. And that was my first exposure to the supernatural, and I was hooked at a very young age. I think I was probably 6 or 7 years old when I saw my first exposures to it. And now a lot of times I find myself going on to the YouTube has blocked a lot of the Haunted History episodes. However, you still can watch a lot of them on other platforms like the Daily Motion. I believe you can watch most of the original episodes. I tend to go back and watch some of the episodes as a form of nostalgia to kind of rekindle back to what got me interested in the topic. And now for the second topic. The second topic was my first exposures. It was always one thing to study, to research, to look into, to learn about topics. And it's not until you experience something firsthand that it really takes on an overwhelming impact on you. And my first experiences were actually in a home that I was living in. We were living in a home that was actually not very old. The house was only probably about, at the time I was living there, maybe 20 years old. However, the property where the house was built could have potentially have been a plantation or could have been a village for some of the native Seminole tribes in the outskirts of Central Florida. So there's a good chance that it could have been something connected to that, or maybe there was a structure there before this house was built. Because I believe the house we were living in was built around the same time that I was born. And it wasn't a house I grew up in. It was more in my teenage years. I lived there for about 4 years, 3 or 4 years. And I had numerous different exposures, seeing shadow people, having my voice called in the middle of the night, being touched multiple times, having voices being heard when there was no one there, having doors open when there was no return vents or any type of vents anywhere near it. Especially there was a French door that connected to the master bedroom that had a really good lock on it, but the door would, even when it was locked, would open on its own in the middle of the day when you're the only one home, without the AC on, without any drafts happening. And multiple different experiences with that. It was actually my first attempt at trying to communicate with those beyond. At the time, hindsight probably wasn't the best interaction. I tried to protect myself the best I could. I allowed for my hand to be used to write on a piece of paper, with ensuring that I didn't give any other control beyond that. And the name that was written out on the paper was named William. I haven't had a chance I would like to go back in time and maybe research to find out a little bit more about who William potentially could have been, or maybe it was just a pseudonym used by the entity that I was interacting with. But that was my first exposure physically to the supernatural, and it really kind of solidified what I was learning about before, and that's why I started my first investigations in my teenage years, going out to various different places that were haunted, or supposedly to be haunted, trying to debunk certain places, trying to solidify and quantify whether or not the claims were true at certain locations, and it kind of just spiraled forward ahead from there, going into me starting to go to other places. And really quickly I started having more and more exposures. There was an urban legend of an Indian, the ghost of an Indian boy that runs across one of the major highways down here in Central Florida. It's called 441, and then the entity is supposed to be in a loincloth sprinting across the road. And it was actually one evening that I saw a figure darting across the road in front of me at about 2:30 in the morning. I couldn't necessarily determine whether or not the entity had a loincloth or not, but yes, I couldn't determine whether or not it was actually the Indian boy per se, but I did experience some dark figure darting across the road that was fairly transparent to some degree, and it didn't move the way that a normal human would have. And then one of my most recent experiences was coming back from Jacksonville, going on some of the old dark back roads, and I can't prove whether or not the entity was actually someone who was not living. I can't prove that, but it was definitely a very eerie situation. We were driving down the pitch dark road, a back county where there wasn't really a lot of homes or anything, and this lady was just slowly walking across the road at a diagonal, completely unknowing to anyone. Didn't even recognize the fact that we were coming. We were coming down the road. We had a light bar going, so it was really bright. Blamming on the horn multiple times. The person or whatever it was just continued to walk at the same pace, walking a diagonal, looking straight, not paying any attention to us. Even when we passed by, didn't even look at us, just kept walking in the same direction that the person was going. And so yeah, it was pretty freaky when that happened. Can I say that it was someone who was not actually there? No, I can't. Can I say that it was a ghost? No, I can't. It could have very well been just a lady who was maybe on some type of medication. Maybe she was intoxicated. Maybe she was purposely trying to walk across the road and was just trying to continue on her path. But it was nothing. What even like when you beeped the horn, they didn't startle, nothing like that. So that was definitely a very interesting situation, and I know if I go back that way again, which I probably will sooner than later, hopefully maybe, it could be a positive thing, to maybe interact with again and kind of solidify if it's something that's just a lady who was walking across the road, if it was some type of residual energy, which is an active entity, fully solid figure. It wasn't transparent at any means, so I don't know. Maybe some of you have had some interactions with that. It's the Road 19 that you travel down from Jacksonville to Central Florida through the Ocala Forest. Maybe some of you have had some experiences on that road yourself. Let me know in the comments. And as always, continue to look for the history in film. Hopefully you like this haunted discussion. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed it, what type of topics you'd like to talk about in the future. And until next time, continue to look for the history in film. See you guys later. Have a good evening.